Today we'll be taking a look at grids in WordPress. In the last video, we looked at Flexbox and how that works. But unlike Flexbox, which is one-dimensional, meaning it's either going horizontal or vertical, grid is two-dimensional, so it goes horizontal and vertical all at the same time. So I'm going to show you all the basics of grids. Then I'm going to show you how you can create very interesting real-world website sections like this, and then something more advanced like this. So if that is something you want to learn how to do, please do stick around, and I'll be going through all of this so that you can get a better understanding of exactly what grids are and how to use them. So to start off, you have two ways of creating a new grid. You can create a new section, then hit this add new container icon here, and then select your grid. Select whichever structure you want, and your grid system would have been created. You can also create a grid by going to the Elements tab here and selecting a grid from the Layout section. So now that we have our grid here, I'm going to go ahead and go over the settings that you need to pay attention to. So let me make my grid 100% viewport height so that we get rid of this down here. We'll talk about this soon. But yes, so now we have our grid. Right now, our grid is boxed. We want to make it full width, so it takes up the entire screen. And then we want to create a grid that has 3 columns and 3 rows. So I'm just going to add 3 here for columns and 3 here for rows. We'll get into the size of columns soon, but I just want to set this up so that we have something working with. Now, we have our grid set up here. Now, it's very easy for you to start adding elements to your grid. What's important to know about this is that once you start adding single elements, each element that you add will take up a new section of the grid. Let me show you what I mean. If I go to add element here, let's say I add a heading. It takes up this first section of the grid. If I go to add element again and I add another heading, it's going into the second section. And you can keep adding things and it will continue to fill up every other section of the grid. So it's really important that you know this, because let's say you wanted to add a heading here and then some content below the heading. If you just click, let me delete this. So let's say you just click a heading and then, oh, I did that in the wrong place. Let me go back up. Where's my grid? Right. So let's say you just click a heading here and then you want to add your text below it. You can't just click it. You'll have to try to bring it over, but then look, it's just adding it into a different section of the grid. So how do you go about creating a situation like that? Let me bring up our layers panel and then delete out some of what we have. Alright, so in a situation like that where you want to add a heading and some context below it, what you need to add first is a container. So I'm going to go to add elements, create a container, and then within the container I can add my heading, and then I can add my text editor and a button, whatever else I need to add. So all of this is just within one cell of the grid. If I want to add something now into the second cell of the grid, I just need to select the grid from the structure here. You can see everything open back up. And then when I go to add element and I select an image, it's going to go into the next available cell. Good. All right. Let me delete these so we can move on to the next thing. All right, so now that our grid is empty, I'm going to go ahead and add just a couple containers so we can see what we're dealing with. All right, I think 6 is good. Okay, so we have 6 containers in our grid right now. So if you come down here to the gaps section and I unlink this, you can see that there's no more gaps within our columns or our rows. So you can introduce gap to the column by adding the number here or just clicking on the arrows to increase it. The same thing goes for the rows. And that is basically how you're able to add spaces in your columns and your rows for your grid. Autoflow is what controls what happens to the extra elements that you add to your grid. So let's say that this grid only has 2 rows, right? Let me make this smaller. So this grid only has 2 rows. Now, if I want to add another container to this row, Autoflow determines whether this gets added to a new row or a new column. So if it is set to row and I duplicate this, it will create a new row. If I delete this and I set it to column, it creates a new column. So it just determines where the additional element is going to go, either in a new row or in a new column. Justify items and align items just align the items within the grid on the horizontal and vertical axis. So if I select center here for align items, it centers everything, move it to the top, move it to the end, or have it stretched. So it is set to stretch by default. The next important thing that you need to know about is controlling the size of the cells within your grid. Now we are going to go back to this section here with our columns and rows, and if you select this FR that you see beside the number, it will bring down this drop down, and if you click the pen icon, it will open up the custom size for you. Now FR just stands for fraction. So right now you're seeing 1 FR, 1 FR, 1 FR. That just indicates that each of these columns is 1 fraction. So the columns are just split up equally between these 3. I can make any of these cells within the column be bigger by simply increasing the number. So I can say, let this be 2 FR. And what happens is that this becomes 2 times this single unit. So now we have in total 4 fractions. This is 2, this is 1, and this is 1 to make 4. I can continue and increase this one to say 2. Now we have 5. 2 from here, 1 from here makes 3, and the 2 from this side makes 5. You can do the same thing for your rows. So I can say let this be 2 FR, and now the first row is 2 times the size of the second row. So this is how you control the size of your columns and your rows in your grid. Now in addition to the fraction, you can also use pixels or any other unit that you normally use when adjusting your sizes. So I can set this to 300 pixels, and now the second row is 300 pixels wide or long, and the first row is 2 FR. So you pretty much now can fully control your grids based on this system here. Now let me show you an application of all that we just discussed a while ago. So if I scroll down to here, you will see that I have this website section that I created. This was created using just a basic grid system. So if I select it, you can see that it is a grid. It has 1, 2, 3, 4 columns and 1 row. Pretty simple, right? The first column is 1 FR, which is the column that contains the text here. The second one is 1.3 FR. Yes, you can use decimals, so you can really get down into some serious details about your grids. And then the last two columns are 0.5 FR. And the single row that we have is just 1 FR. So just by setting this up like this, I'm able to create a really nice and clean looking section for a beauty website. And I can then add images to the background of this along with some text. Now, this section here is just another container that I added to the first column. Let me open, it was already open. You can see that it's another container within this container here, and I just move it over using margin top and margin left to make it position like this. And so if I should exit that, let me bring up the full screen. Where is it? Oh no, I closed the preview. So this is what it looks like on the preview of the website. So this is the power of the basic grid system, and you can do a whole lot more with it. But just by knowing how to navigate what is already there, then you'll be capable of making things like this. Now, there's another level to this which gets a whole lot more complicated, but the rewards are greater because now you're able to create really unique and advanced looking grid systems. If you should take a look at this, would you be able to tell me how many columns and how many rows this is? It may take you a little while to try to figure it out. And then what the hell is going on with this plate in the center here anyway? So we'll get into all of that. But before we do, let's understand the concepts first. So let me get rid of this. And we're back into Elementor. Now, this is the current grid that we're working on. But what if I should ask you, create a grid like this for me, where we have 3 columns, 3 rows, but I want an item in the top row to take up 2 columns and the second item to only take up 1. I want the second row to be completely filled out with just 1 item, and then I want the reverse of the top row at the bottom. If you should take a look at our current grid, and if I select it and go to the settings here, there isn't anything at all listed here that can help me to create what I just showed you. You can create this by using some form of combination between grids and Flexbox, or you can put a grid within a grid and you can create something eventually. But I find that that's not the best way to go. The best way to go is to manipulate the grid itself. The drawback with this though is that it does require you to know a teeny tiny bit of CSS, and it's really good if you can catch this because it will change how you develop in WordPress, and you'll be able to create whatever you want rather than to just solely rely on what is already created by somebody else. So let me show you what I mean. Right now we have this grid here. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 containers, and I'm going to use that to create this layout that we see here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reset my grid. I just want it to be 1 FR. And I can just switch and select to So 3 columns, let me just switch this, and 3 rows. Now we have, let me check, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items. So I'm going to delete one of these, and then I'm just going to change the background color of a few of these. So the second one should be some sort of green. The third one is yellow. And the fourth one is that same type of green. I'll use this one. And then the fifth one can stay pink, right? Yeah, those are the colors that we have. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to give the grid itself a class name. So I'm going to select the grid, go to Advanced, go to CSS Classes, and give this a class name of Grid 2. Then we need to give each of the containers a class name as well. So I'm going to select the container, go to Advanced. I'm going to call this Card 1. Go to the second one. I'm calling this Card 2. And Card 3. Card 4. And finally, Card 5. Publish. And now if I go back to my preview section, so once you, let me just do it over so you can see. Select the preview changes icon here, the eyeball. It will take you to the preview screen. Then you want to select Customize. Once you're on the customization screen, look all the way to the bottom and select Additional CSS. And it is here that we're going to write the small bits of code that will allow us to manipulate our grid. All right. This is some that I had before. I don't want you to see that and then get confused. So let's start out with the grid itself. So we gave the grid a CSS name of grid 2. So to access it here, we need to say dot grid 2 and then open and close parentheses. The attribute that we're using to access the grid is called grid template areas. So once you start to type grid template, you will see it, grid template areas. So select it, put colon, and then you want to press enter. And this is going to be really nice visually. So we have 3 columns and 3 rows, right? So we're going to create 3 sections to add our grid areas. So we need to do 1 colon like that, which represents 1 row. Press enter, row number 2, row number 3, and we can put a semicolon after row number 3. Now we can start adding in the different names for the boxes that we created. So I can say this is card 1, card 2, card 3. Well, actually, let me just use card alone because I don't want to add the numbers first. So let's just add card to it. Alright, so there we go. Now, the reason why I arranged it this way is so that you can visually see that we have 1, 2, 3 columns and 1, 2, 3 rows. So visually it connects back to what we're trying to create. That is the same number of rows and columns that we have for our grid. Now we need to assign each of our cards their grid areas. So to do that, we need to access the classes that we added to each card. So if you remember, it was dot card 1, open and close parentheses, And then we're just going to use grid area and give this card 1 the name of card 1. And we close. Now we're going to do the same thing for card 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I'm just going to copy and paste this 4 more times. And then I can just change the numbers. So that's card 2, card 3, this is card 4. I keep messing up the number. And then this is card 5. Now you can hit publish. And let's take a look back on what we have over here. So if I select my grid, you can see 3 columns, 3 rows. And just because we don't have a container for the rest of the grid doesn't mean that these other sections don't exist. So we need to just go ahead and keep working. Now, because we have given each of our cards their grid area name, now we can say exactly where we want them to go. So let's take a look at the design that we have. So in this design, the first card, we want it to take up 2 columns in the first row. So what we're going to do is to have card 1 take up these 2 sections. So I'm just going to add card 1 to these 2 sections here. Now that we've added card 1 to these 2 sections here, you're still not seeing any change. That's because we need to complete this first row. So we know from our layout design that we want card number 2 to just take up 1 cell in the first row. So I'm just going to add card number 2 to that first cell. And there we start to see our grid coming together. For our second row, we want card number 3 to take up the entire row. So I'm just going to add card number 3 all the way across. See? And then for our final row, we want card 4 to take up 1 spot and card 5 to take up 2. So I'm just going to do card number 4 and then card number 5 for 2 spots. And there we have our section created. So once I publish that and I go back into WordPress, let me refresh the page. Now you can see that we have our section here. So that's how you would go ahead and create custom layouts using grids. If you want to make the rows bigger, you can do what we did earlier and come back over to your columns and rows, and I can change this to say 2FR to make it a lot bigger. I can do 4FR or 500 pixels, whatever you feel comfortable doing, but that is how you would create a larger space to work with. So that's pretty easy, right? Now let me show you the real benefit of doing this and why it is something that you should consider knowing to do. Because now if I should say to you, I want this cell to take up these 2 rows, I want this card to take up the entire top row, and then I want this cell to be down here at the bottom, right? Which is coincidentally the same layout that we have. So the current layout that we have down here have 1 card taking up these 2 rows. We have the top card taking up the entire row, and then we have another card coming down here to share the space with card number 5. Now let's go ahead and create that. I'll show you how easy it is to modify this grid. If you didn't do it this way and you want to modify your grid, you would most likely have to be deleting out sections, trying to add things back, and that can become a real mess real quick. So let's go. I'm going to go back into our customization screen, and we're just going to visually do this. So the first card should take up the entire first row. So I'm going to change card number 2 here to card number 1. Now, card number 1 is taking up the entire first row, and it actually kicked out card number 2 to all the way down here. So we'll address card number 2 in a second. Then we want this card here, which looks to be card number 4, to take up these 2 rows. So I'm going to change one of the card number 3s to card number 4, and now card number 4 is taking up 2 rows. Then we want 2 separate sections down here. So right now we have card number 5 taking up 2 columns. So we want to put the card number 2 that got kicked out right here. So I'm just going to change card number 5 to card number 2. And there we go. That is our layout. So if I should publish it, close this and go back and refresh. You will see that we have the same layout as we did down here. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and remove all the space between the columns and the rows so that I can show you what's going on here. So right here we have a plate, a salad plate. It's a PNG image, but as you may be guessing, that PNG image isn't a section, it's not a part of our grid. So what's going on there? So the first thing we're going to do is get our image into the grid. So let me open up our layers so we can see what we're working with. So we have our grid selected. I'm going to go to this plus icon here. Then I'm going to select image. So we have our image added to the grid now. I'm just going to choose the salad, and there it is. So how do I get my salad from here to be in this tiny section up here? This leads us into the second thing that you need to know, which is really, really important. Let me save this here. Now, grids allow you to position elements anywhere within itself. So you can look at a grid, know the coordinates, and put an element exactly where you want it to be. The only other way to do that is by using the positioning of absolute or relative, and that can become really complicated if you don't know what you're doing. But with grids, you can simply add this to the spot that you want it to be. And let me show you the concept that holds this all together. Here we have 3 rows and 3 columns, right? So even though we have 3 columns, it is actually counted as 4 because the count starts from this first section here. So it's 1 column, 2 column, 3 column, 4 columns. Same thing for the rows. It's counted as 1, 2, 3, 4. So even though we have 3 rows, when we're doing positioning, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. If you have 5 rows, then it is going to be 6, and so on and so forth. So let's go all the way back now to our customization screen, and we're going to go to the end of our code. Oh, I didn't give the image a CSS name. So let me select the image first, go to advanced. I'm just going to give it a class name of salad. Now we can go ahead and access our salad. And we're still going to be using grid area. So just type that out and add your colons. So the column and row numbers that we just talked about is what we're going to be using to position this salad within our grid, and we want it to be positioned right in this little section here. The reason why the grid is currently squished up right now is because the salad is just pushing things away. But once we start to move the salad, it will come back, you'll see. So the way we do this is by adding the row start first, then the column start, row end, and then column end. And those are the numbers. So the row start would be row number 2, because we want this salad to be within this box right here. So the starting row is row number 2. Remember, if we're counting, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're starting at row number 2. See, when I add 2, how it starts to change things up. And then we're starting at column number 1. Good. Now we want it to end at which row? We want it to end at row number 4. So row number 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then finally, we want it to end at which column? Column number 3. So this is column number 1, 2, 3, 4. We want the salad to be within this box, so we're ending it on column number 3. Now we can add our semicolon, and we can see that our salad is within this box. Now we can publish so that the changes can come over into Elementor. Let's refresh. And now we're seeing our salad. So from here, it gets pretty easy. We can just click on the image, then we can resize it. And then we can just use our margins to move it to where we want it to be. So I'm just pushing it from the top right down to the section that I want it to be in. And there we go. That is how you position any element within your grid. You can make sure that you set this up to right where you want it to be and create really dynamic, really good looking original layouts. So this is a full example of what you can create. This is something for like an Airbnb. I just whipped it up. So you can sit down and draw layouts on paper and come into WordPress and create whatever it is that you thought up, if you understand how you can really manage and access the features of grid elements and also Flexbox. So we'll be touching on some of these a lot more in the coming days. But thank you so much for watching. If you're still here, I do hope you learned. I hope I went slow enough. I tried to kind of go as slow as possible. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. Do remember though to subscribe so that you don't miss the other videos that I'll be putting out like this one. And I will see you in the next one. So take care.